Here's something nobody tells you. The smartest person in the room is usually the one quietly convinced they don't belong there. Not as a performance, not as false modesty. Structurally, at the level of how their brain is wired. The same cognitive machinery that makes them brilliant is the exact machinery building the case against themselves, in real time, faster than anyone else could. That image you have, the effortless genius, the lab coat, the quiet authority, the person who just knows, it's almost entirely fiction. The reality is more interesting, more chaotic, and far more human than that. And if you've ever stayed awake at 3 a.m., not working on anything important, just awake, catastrophically, uselessly awake, replaying something you said in 2009, you may already know what I'm talking about. Here are 7 psychological patterns that show up consistently in people with genuinely high IQs. See how many land. 1. They doubt themselves more than almost anyone around them. This is the single most consistent finding. Not the kind of self-doubt that fishes for reassurance, the deep, structural kind, where they genuinely, persistently believe they are less capable than they actually are. The research on this is compelling. Higher performers consistently underestimate their standing. Lower performers consistently overestimate theirs. And the most coherent explanation is this. The more deeply you understand something, the more clearly you can see its full complexity, and therefore every way you're still falling short. The person who barely understands a domain feels surprisingly confident. The person who has spent years inside it sees the gaps. What this produces is a kind of permanent, low-grade anxiety, a feeling of getting away with something, that people have overestimated them, that eventually someone will work it out. And here's the part that's almost darkly funny. That same brain making them exceptional at complex reasoning, it's equally exceptional at constructing elaborate, internally consistent arguments for why they're not good enough. The most qualified person in the room is often the one most convinced they shouldn't be there. 2. They're wired to be night owls, and it's neurological, not a lifestyle choice. Research published in Personality and Individual Differences by Kanazawa and Perina found that people with higher measured intelligence consistently went to bed later and woke up later, even after controlling for work schedules and social obligations. The evolutionary framing is striking. Deliberately overriding your circadian rhythm for self-chosen abstract purposes, reading, thinking, creating, is a relatively recent human behavior. It appears more frequently in people with higher general intelligence. What this means practically is that a lot of very sharp people are chronically sleep-deprived, operating in a world built for a morning schedule their biology will never naturally adopt. It gets read as laziness. It isn't. Their hardware just runs on a different clock. 3. They talk to themselves, out loud, more than they'd ever admit. This one has real research behind it. Private speech, the technical term for self-directed verbal thought, is well documented as a mechanism for cognitive self-regulation. Saying something aloud genuinely helps the brain process it differently than just thinking it. For high IQ individuals, language isn't just communication, it's a thinking tool. When there's no one to think with, the conversation still has utility, so they have it anyway. The social side effect is occasionally getting caught doing it in a grocery store and having to hastily pretend they were on the phone. 4. They're disproportionately prone to anxiety, and there's a direct reason why. Penny and Boone published research showing a genuine link between high verbal intelligence and elevated levels of worry. The hypothesis? The same capacity for predictive thinking that makes someone analytically gifted also makes them extraordinarily good at imagining everything that could go wrong. Your brain is, among other things, a threat detection system. A more powerful brain doesn't mean a calmer one, it means a faster, more thorough threat detector, one that can generate disastrous scenarios you hadn't considered yet, at speed, with disturbing specificity. High IQ individuals tend to be anxious because their brains never stop running simulations, and some of those simulations are terrifying. 5. They forget ordinary things, constantly, embarrassingly. Keys, whether they replied to that message, the name of someone they've met 4 times. This drives the people around them insane. It also drives them insane. This is more observed pattern than hard research finding, take it accordingly, but the most coherent cognitive explanation is prioritization. A mind heavily invested in complex, abstract processing allocates less attention to low-stakes, repetitive information. The keys will end up somewhere. Something else felt more urgent. It doesn't make it less frustrating, but it does explain how someone who can mentally model a 15-step problem sometimes genuinely cannot remember if they turned off the stove. 6. They swear more, and it's actually a sign of verbal sophistication. A study by J&J published in Language Sciences found that people comfortable using profanity score higher on verbal intelligence tests, not lower. They're not swearing because they've run out of better words. They're swearing because they understand language thoroughly enough to know exactly which word fits the moment, and occasionally that word is a four-letter one. Words are tools. A skilled craftsman uses whatever tool the job requires. 7. The world is, to them, genuinely too loud. Research has found associations with high cognitive ability and heightened sensory processing sensitivity. The brain that takes in more information analytically may also, quite literally, take in more sensory input than average. Crowded restaurants aren't just annoying, they're overwhelming in a way that isn't dramatic or performative, just real. Certain sounds, textures, and lighting conditions register as intrusive rather than background noise. The same bandwidth processing complexity deeply is also processing the environment deeply, and the environment is a lot. This is why many high IQ individuals strongly prefer controlled, quiet, low-stimulation spaces to work, not as a quirk, but because their nervous systems are running under a heavier cognitive load than most people around them realize. What this adds up to is a picture that looks nothing like the movies. It looks like someone quietly exhausted by their own mind, brilliant in ways that are real and sometimes remarkable, also anxious, self-doubting, scattered, nocturnal, occasionally talking to themselves in a parking garage, genuinely startled by how loud that restaurant was. If you recognize yourself in this, in the 3 a.m. wakefulness, in the persistent doubt, in the emotional weight of a brain that simply will not stop, that recognition matters. Not because intelligence makes suffering more valid or more interesting, but because a lot of people who carry this profile spend their entire lives being told they have every advantage and never quite understanding why it still feels so hard. Now you know why.